18 players, good stuff that we nailed. But Bob, at the end of the day, before we dive into everything, it was net profits, man. And that's the number one thing you look for going in and out of a week. I'm sure there are some players that we wish we were on the bus with harder. Joe Mixon's one of the guys we were talking about before it started. But man, overall, can never complain about a profitable week. Cincinnati, problem town. But the rest of them, great weeks, great weeks. Love how that Detroit game ended. We got plenty of fantasy talk to bring up here for the upcoming. We got your Q&As coming at us. And man, I'm just excited that week one got some wins on us in our personal home league. Me and you scored the second and third highest points in the week. Unfortunately, I just happened to be playing you, so it's always rough when you get the third highest points.
I mean, that's happened.
Man, there's nothing worse than that. Nothing worse than that. But here we are. Here's life. Where do you want to start, Bob? Because there's so many changes that we learned as week one's normally going to give you. There's a lot of noise that I don't think we need to factor in, but there is certainly some important things we do need to factor. Where do you want to start? Injuries, usage? What do you think?
So there's a couple of points I want to make first and foremost when it comes to this upcoming season here is that back to old coach Denny Green for the Arizona Cardinals, Minnesota Vikings. And I just want to start with the comment that we knew who we thought they were, right? And the team that I'm specifically talking about here, and it both goes in a positive and a negative direction here. The number one team that we kind of knew what we thought they were was Houston for me. Houston is one of those teams where we knew this team was going to continue to march down the field. We knew the team was going to score. One of the things that we weren't 100% sure of, and most fantasy analysts will also tell you this, and most contributors to the fantasy community will tell you this as well, is that we didn't know once they got to the red zones where those touchdowns were going to go. And it's very clear that Nico Collins is their chain mover when it comes to the wide receiver room.
He's the number one. There's no doubt.
He is the player to own in my book from Houston, 1,000%. Now, when it comes to the other wide receivers in this room, the fact that they're specifically designing plays for Diggs in the red zone bodes well for all people that own Diggs. We were out on Diggs. We were out on Diggs in the season because we weren't sure where that production was going to come. But basing it just on this week one performance, it's exciting to see what that role could be. And it's also exciting to know that all wide receivers in Houston will be ownable and startable for the foreseeable future. I mean, granted, Tank Dell didn't have a great game, but when we look at
Tank Dell was right within his range of expectations.
Right.
Though.
When we look at
the dive deeper into this here, Bob, the where we see Diggs perform really should make sense if we would have looked at it from this perspective beforehand. Is he didn't take away from the other receivers in terms of usage, which is why we don't have fear on. The one he took away from was Schultz.
Absolutely.
They basically said, hey, we can upgrade at our red zone by getting rid of Schultz, which essentially is what they just did by putting Diggs there. And that's how we got to look at this. So Schultz owners, you need to look around quick.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to get prettier.
And then also building off of that, when we look at the numbers from this team and we look at the opportunities, granted, they were facing Indy, who may not have the best defense. It's very clear that might not be.
Indy impressed me though.
They're an impressive looking offense. And the fact, and I want to get to that as my next talking point, but I want to just touch on, here with CJ Stroud to end my point about Houston here, is that when we look at Houston, they passed it 32 times. Joe Mixon ran the ball 30 times. So they had the ball for over 60 plays in this game. And this team is a team that, as that score kept going up, they're not like pumping the brakes at all. They're still allowing their performers to be in it because that game really wasn't over. This defense is going to help this offense look really good over the course of this year. There's going to be plenty of opportunities. And one of the players we were out on in the offseason, just because, running backs moving teams, unsure situations, but a player that I liked that our models didn't like, that that you didn't like as well, was Joe Mixon, because we liked other players in his same range of outcomes. What we saw here this past week is that if given the opportunity, and if given plenty of opportunities, Joe Mixon will thrive.
Yes.
Now, the question will be, as the season moves on, is that will there be as many of those games with wonderful opportunities? And it very well could be that this season you're probably going to see a lot of Joe Mixon. But
and I think that's the part that came really across, was that Mixon, this is the debate that we had going into, and Houston is no different than any other team with this. When you have a major free agent switching teams, is that in general, and this is an NFL wide thing, they put the new free agent into the usage of what their role was, meaning that if you become the new number 2 receiver, you're going to be used as the same number 2 receiver. There's 2 glaring exceptions for that this week, which we'll hit upon later.
Yeah.
The first is the structural Houston. I mean, that the entire organization did it different, because they took it into the tight end pool for Diggs, and then they just went off of Mixon's normal usage. So when we look at the other free agents that moved around, a lot of them just kind of slotted into, hey, I'm the number 2 receiver here. The number 2 receiver used to give me X percentage of usage, and that's what I got. And that's why when we look at our projections on teams like the Bills, we're much closer than most teams, because we just went off of what they normally do, but then compiled it correctly to what Arizona was going to allow, which is the harder part of this equation.
So, secondly, we knew who they thought they were, kind of players and teams here, is Indy. Indy's a team. We knew that Anthony Richardson was going to run the ball. We knew that Anthony Richardson was going to move the ball downfield. We didn't know in which way, other than rushing, who he was going to throw it to. And what we saw is a player that we knew what he was when he came into the league last year. We knew he liked to run it, but the amount of I would say, I don't know if it's efficiency more so, but the amount of stats that he put up in the limited number of reps that those stats came from is impressive, right? Getting 27 points this past week, number 4 overall on the week in terms of quarterbacks. And he did it with a small amount of rushing and not a lot of passing touchdowns, right? And so what I'm seeing here is a quarterback that, if you drafted him, this was one of the reasons why we talked about not drafting Michael Pittman, is that this is a player that, although Pittman was targeted, right? It's not that Pittman was left out of this game, but Pittman only had 4 targets. He caught all 4. And so that's
he's not gonna he doesn't like Pittman as much as Minshew will. I mean, it's just the fact.
Yeah, and so one of the things that, when I say that we knew who they thought they were, we knew that Anthony Richardson was going to distribute the ball at a decent pace. We knew that Pittman, at least this week 1, it could be an issue for Pittman. But what I do know is that when we look at Fantasy Pros, Pittman had 42% of the team's targets. So it was a low outcome passing offense here this week. We knew that was probably going to be one of the outcomes, but we were a little bit shocked that with 9 completions and 19 attempts, that he was able to do what he did in that amount of space, right?
Yeah.
So we knew that this offense is going to rely on the ground game a decent amount because of their offensive line. And I'm not shocked by this outcome. I do think that when they face rougher defenses, that this will be a little bit more of a problematic standpoint if you're only passing the ball 19 times and maybe you're not able to get it going on the ground as much as they did. But with a guy like Jonathan Taylor there to pair with him, it just seems like there's some possibly good outcomes for that.
Yeah, so to give the full analysis here on the Colts, and I think this is something that we're going to look forward here.
Before you get there, Joe,
Hmm?
George, yeah, when Joe and I were thinking about you, I was texting Joe last night and saying, it was kind of a lose situation with Zay Flowers, Javonte Williams, and DJ Moore, and DJ Moore and DJ Moore and Zay Flowers, they both didn't get the touchdowns, but they pretty much did what we
they should have though.
They pretty much did what we thought they were going to do. When we spoke about Caleb Williams' struggles, those were real. We're going to think about that. George, I think that's a wise decision.
Well, I wouldn't jump Javonte yet. That's a little early. I'm not behind that one.
I think it's a wise decision, but I'd wait a couple weeks to do it unless there's somebody else better on the waiver wire. We'll get to the Broncos. We're going to be talking.
We are going to talk about the Broncos. You're not playing Javonte this week against the Steelers. I can tell you that.
I won't play him this week. No,
you're definitely not. So George, like I said, with Zay, I certainly wouldn't worry about him moving forward. We're going to hit on the Baltimore Ravens here in a minute.
Like Bigsby.
But with that being said, to finish the thought on the Colts are going to end up being basically all power rankings all year long, ranking between 21 and 17. Maybe they'll get up to 13 every once in a while. They are your definition of slightly below average football team. And you compare, because they have nothing super elite. You compare their offense to what the Steelers did. It's a very comparable offense between Richardson and Fields under center. The Colts offense is probably a little bit better, but not dramatically so. The difference is the Steelers offense could be the top offense in the league.
Whose?
The Steelers. The Steelers defense could be one of the top.
You said offense.
I said offense. I meant the Steelers defense could be one of the top defenses in the league. Their offense is horrendous. So that's why you had there. And quite frankly, what we're going to hit aside this at the end of the show, but if you do kicker points based upon yardage kicked, there was some stupid points put up from kickers this week. But George, to looking at your roster moving forward, let's dive in here in Denver for a minute.
Hold on,
should I expect the 50 from Monty and Gibbs?
Yeah, let's answer that question.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically what they did last year. There's no reason to suspect it to be different. Gibbs will have the edge in the PPR leagues because he's the better pass catcher. But the one thing you saw last night watching that game was that they definitely did drive intensives where there were drives that Monty just wasn't on the field.
Yeah.
And they wanted to give it. And if they don't go to overtime, Gibbs dramatically outscores Monty. But when they got, and this is why it's supportive for the Monty owners, when it got time to establish the game in the beginning and to win it in crunch time at the end, it was all Monty all day, and that's what they did. So I definitely think that you're going to have more Gibbs love in their blowout games, and good for Detroit fans. There's a lot more blowout games than close games on their schedule. It's a bad division. And it's a very manageable schedule. And all by the way, without Love, that division just ended. I mean, right now they're as likely as Kansas City to win this thing. It's over.
Yeah, George, I'm what I see from the stats is that what we knew was the thing is happening again. Gibbs is on the field for running plays. He will run the ball. He is also their primary pass catcher out of the backfield. Monty is not that. What you're getting from Monty is a guy that is going to definitely they're just going to try to pound the rock with Monty when he's on the field.
He's good at
2 different styles. They offer Detroit many different looks. So if on a week-to-week basis, if I'm looking at what's going to happen, I do think it's going to be that 40-50% share. Maybe some weeks it might be a little bit different. You might be, 60% one way, 40% the other. But I don't think it's going to be too dramatically shifted from one direction to the other. What I did like about Gibbs in the game last night is that just like they did last year towards the end of last season, their red zone touches are pretty much split. If they're in the game, and they haven't broken off a big run or anything like that. They're staying in the game in the red zone. They're not subbing each other in to do that. If it's your drive, you're in basically the whole drive. If it's not your drive, you're basically not in and you're not seeing the field. So if that happens to be a Detroit scoring drive and you happen to be on the field, then you have a good chance of that touchdown. But that's the thing about Detroit is that they're using both of these backs appropriately when it comes to ball distribution here. I am in on both.
And when you're looking downfield to next week,
yeah,
I would suspect Gibbs to be a big part of it. Part of the reason Monty, they're starting off there is the Rams just lost Aaron Jones. You have to test those defensive tackles with Monty up the middle, and he did.
And here's the thing.
Next week against Tampa, you're going to be testing their lateral speed on David, and Gibbs is the one who does that.
And Tampa also blitzed at a dramatic rate against Washington, one of the higher rates in the league last week. And so if they're going to beat that blitz, there's a good chance that that's going to be a lot of passes to Gibbs. And Monty will.
Well, they're not going to do that against Detroit. They did that against Washington because the simple fact is Eckler can't outrun them. Gibbs can't.
Monty will have his fair share on a week-to-week basis, and Gibbs will have their fair share on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, that's not a running back room to worry about, trade or not. All right, so here we got here.
Bronson, I wouldn't do that.
No, it's too much.
Here's the thing. What we saw from Burrow is that, and we were going to talk about this before, but we'll talk about it now. We were going to talk about it later, but we'll talk about it now. What's happening at the Bengals right now, at least this week, I'm not overreacting. I'm just being, visually looking at what's happening, is that, the Bengals over the last couple of years that Stacey has been the offensive coordinator there have been garbage the first 2 weeks of the season. Yes, not having T. Higgins on the field did hurt the Bengals offense. Absolutely 1,000%. But the way that this flowchart of the passes worked in week one is a bit concerning, knowing that Burrow is coming off of a wrist injury that we haven't seen from a quarterback before. And if you look at the flowchart of Burrow's passes, and you can go on Reddit or Fantasy Pros, anything like that, and you look, these are almost all like lateral, like it's all like going laterally. Nothing was going down the field. And granted, T. Higgins is one of those guys that they want to push down the field, but you chase his back. He's healthy. You're not pushing it. It was weird. And
it's a hurt quarterback who knows he can't throw the ball down the field. Do not trade for Burrow. There's tremendous concern here. He's going to get shut down.
And
he's not making it to September, or he's not making it to Halloween.
I wouldn't go out there and trade Mahomes, because what we saw from Mahomes is that this offense is, once again, there is star power in that wide receiver room. Rashee Rice is the real deal. Xavier Worthy is worth monitoring, because a gadget play and then a really good catch and run. You still have Kelsey, who was boxed out this past game, but you knew that was going to happen because they don't want Kelsey to get loose in the underneath routes. Then you have Pacheco, who dropped a couple passes but can also move that ball downfield. This is a team that can move the ball downfield. Now, Waddle, hurt, not hurt. We'll see what happens there. And
Waddle's always hurt or not hurt and still gets you 100 yards.
Debo could be electric. We're yet to see that tonight. So if I were you and I was looking to make a move and I wanted CD, I would try to not move Mahomes and just try to exclusively focus on CD, because it seems like Burrow was included to offset Mahomes. And if I wanted CD, I might offer Waddle and Debo. I think that's a little too much.
That is too much.
But I do think that is something that somebody would look at and say, hey, I'd consider that. But I'd leave the quarterbacks out of it, because Joe and I were talking about this with Burrow, and again, it's not an overreaction. It's a wait and see. I know people trying to buy low on Burrow, but
don't buy him. He's broken.
What we saw week one tells me, just like Joe just said, is that he's not worth buying right now, because you're only going to be damaging your hopes of winning. Maybe if he gets a game or two under his belt with like 15, 16 points, where it's like a little bit safer to go after him. I mean, just to consider.
It's not even about the points. You got to see him consistently putting that ball 25 yards downfield, and he can't do it. This offense can't work without him doing it. which,
Right.
by the way, is really hurting my Santana Moss or my Zach Moss. But that's a side story.
But here's the thing from week 1 about Joe Burrow that I think is more damaging to his trade right now is that these are the quarterbacks that scored around the same points as Joe Burrow: Will Levis, Kirk Cousins, Jacoby Brissett, Caleb Williams, Daniel Jones.
Yep. That's not
And
the neighborhood
Daniel
you want to be shopping
Jones
for, let alone
Daniel,
spending MVPs on.
Daniel Jones was basically the last starting quarterback that started a whole game that scored points. So that's something to be considered as, not yet, Bronson. So I'd look elsewhere at this point in time. A trade target that I think is worth thinking about, Joe, based upon what I saw, but not over Mahomes, granted, right? Not over Mahomes, would be a guy like, again, Tua is out there. He's worth trading for.
Tua is definitely worth picking up.
I wouldn't start him over Mahomes.
No.
Again, Stafford, this offense, even without Puka, 21. Again, this is part of we knew who they were. Cooper Kupp got 21 targets. That's an insane amount of targets.
Well, part of Puka went down early.
And a guy that is like, we knew this was coming, but not to this extent. And we're not going to spend too much time on him, is Bo Nix. Bo Nix had 42 pass attempts in his first game in the NFL.
It's a
13
bad run team. It's a bad run organization.
13 fantasy points, and like 4 of those wide receivers had over like 8 targets or something like that, which is crazy. And some, Deshaun Vela was their top target or top reception total for the season or for that game. Weird. It was just weird.
It's not weird. It's a poorly run organization. Denver is in big time trouble. That being said, you asked earlier about Williams. I don't want to get rid of him because at the end of the day here, they're going to end up checking down to him like crazy, like Kamara. I mean, he is going to take that role, and there's a good chance that he ends up getting the garbage time answers of the future. They just got to step up and prove it. This week they're playing the Steelers. Looking at what that pass rush did to a much better Atlanta offensive line, I mean, Williams might have 14 checkdowns thrown his way this week. It is totally possible.
I would not give up on Javonte Williams yet. I'd wait a week or two to still do that.
I'm not saying I'm starting him against the Steelers, but I at least want to see if the checkdowns continue to happen. Another team I want to dive to right now, going back to earlier in the week.
Hold on. Before we get there, Joe, I just want to mention my last, and it's a negative. We knew who they thought they were. Kind of.
Oh, I like those.
Is the Carolina Panthers. Both offense and defense. I was willing in a lot of best ball drafts in the last round or in one of the last rounds to go after Bryce Young and Adam Thielen, because I still thought that there could be some value in Thielen. And it shows that there could be just a moderate amount of value in Thielen.
Sure, it's flex too.
However, when it comes to the defenses, the defense was bad last year. It looks like it's going to continue to be bad. Tampa, for what they are, they made Baker Mayfield again make.
That was Washington played Tampa. Carolina played New Orleans.
Oh yeah, Carolina's my bad. They made Derek Carr look amazing.
He did.
They made the Saints offense look amazing. And one of the things that must be said about that, right, is that we went on last week and you were talking about Derek Carr checking it down a lot. Derek Carr does check it down a lot, but he also can bomb it. He can also throw the ball really well. If the fact that Carolina, from what I understand it to be, did not get so much pressure on Derek Carr, you saw in that game what Derek Carr can do when given the amount of time necessary to do it. And what you didn't see was that ball going to Chris Olave.
Well, they took their foot off the
right?
gas. That's a
So
big part of it.
again, I get it, but when you look at what we were talking about in terms of the
Yeah, but
expectations
all
of
right.
this
So this
team,
isn't that they don't like Olave though. This is the one
I
thing
didn't
about
say
Carolina.
that.
Carolina's defense has one corner,
And it's
and they
Jason
put him on
Witten.
Olave. And Carr was like, "Well, I'll tear up this JV core around him. Why should I risk it?"
But I'm
And that's
not
what they did.
speaking, Joe, I'm not speaking of that. I'm speaking more of the problem. We were talking about this with DJ Moore last week, where when you're facing shadow coverage or when you have to overcome a defender, Chris Olave is not doing that.
Oh no,
And
see, I disagree with that. I don't think that. See, I think that the other ones around him, and you can watch this on tape, were so ridiculously open. There's no point in taking the risk. I mean, Carr had
understood.
so many easy passes in that game. There was no point in trying to force him. This was not like last night when you saw the ball getting forced to Cup. It
I'm there
actually
with
more
you,
so
Joe.
was like what you saw from Detroit with
I'm
a
there with
law
you
being
though.
blanketed.
But
Just take the Reynolds yards.
but it's concerning to a degree that, and we were talking about this in the preseason, is that he's not a guy that thrives on when he's playing, when Chris Olave is playing, and when this team for New Orleans is playing, they need to get in a rhythm, right? And when they get in a rhythm, this is a team that can potentially score a lot of points. This is obviously the worst defense they're going to play basically all season.
Yeah, to Washington, yeah.
It's not going to happen again. And so my concern for a guy like Olave, and I'm not willing to like go out on it yet because they do play Philadelphia, and Philadelphia didn't look like they could stop the pass at all. Like they couldn't do it last year. It doesn't look like they can do it again this year.
We'll dive into that in a minute.
My concern for Olave is the fact that in these games where there's teams that only have one corner, they're going to basically eliminate. He only got two.
No, that's 100% true. Hey, and on that point, Bob, we have been. You look at all of our best balls, which we have done collectively, nearly 50 of them. Olave's not on a single one of them, unless we intentionally forced him.
Or
Olave
unless he was
is
taken
someone
in the
that
third round.
All of the metrics were down on, all of them, and it shouldn't be surprising that he's not producing now.
But I do want to bring up, like, so I don't want to dog him anymore because we already knew who we thought he was.
Well, it is a crucial point about why you listen to us instead of ESPN, though.
He had 2 targets, 2 catches, 11 yards. So it's nice that he caught his 2 targets, 8.3% target share. That's definitely not good. But I mean, they're using their tight ends. They're using Foster Moreau, Juwan Johnson. Like, they were using their tight ends more than Olave, which, okay, you can do that. That's fine. But I also want to say that, like, they put up 47 points, a lot of kicker points, and some of the other threats looked good. But this Carolina team is very bad. And if you're looking at streaming defenses, right? If you're looking at streaming defenses, this is, again, or if you're doing a suicide pool or something like that, or a survivor pool.
Go against Carolina and Washington a lot.
It feels like they're a targetable team, again, unless they can pull their stuff together, which it doesn't look like they can yet. But I'm looking at this, right? They face the Chargers next week. Deploy Chargers at will, right? Your J.K. Dobbins. Like, J.K. Dobbins looks like this could be another elite game for him in a row.
We'll have all our official rankings tomorrow.
Lad McConkey will be nuts. You look again, week 3, Gardner Minshew should pretty much handle them. It was a shame what happened to the Raiders in that game towards the end of the game. But I think they have a lot.
Coach stopped believing in them. They should have gone for it twice more than they did.
You look at this Panthers schedule, and Chicago's defense looked really good against Tennessee. They should tear them apart. I just bring it up because it's another. We knew who we thought they were. They're not a good team. They won't be a good team this year. They really can't really come back from that. Bryce Young did put up 11 points fantasy wise. He got saved a little bit towards that time where they were just like, whatever, we're just going to do whatever on the field right now. And so I just think that those expectations for some of these teams going forward is important to think about, because if I'm deploying anybody against Carolina, I need to understand that there's a very high possibility that whoever the alpha is will get locked out of the game. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, target the slot guy, target the number 2 on this team, target the downfield threat, because it's very obvious they can't stop the downfield threat no matter what they do. So if I'm sitting here with the Chargers next week, and I'm saying, well, who could be their threat down the field? I don't know if the Chargers have one. It didn't
Not really, because it'd be Quentin Johnson, and that didn't really go at him too much.
It didn't seem like they did have one last week, but I'm very curious how that's going to happen. And again, speaking of all of these teams that faced off against defenses that weren't super great, Tampa against Washington, like we were talking about, and even we were discussing a little bit too about Seattle, and we were talking about both Seattle and Kenny Walker and Rachaad White last week too, Joe. Kenny Walker shows up, does his thing as we expected that to happen. But Rachaad White, again, we knew who we thought they were kind of player. Terrible efficiency on the ground. Didn't really encapsulate me in the way that I wanted to be, and that I wanted him to perform last week. And
still gave you 16.6 in PPR though.
He did give you the 16. He did give you the 16.6 because he had 6 receptions. But again, the efficiency is troubling, to say the very least. 15 carries.
That's true, but he falls in the end zone, he's a top 5 back. So
when he falls in the end zone, he's a top 5 back. But also on the back end of that, Bucky Irving, 9 carries and 62 yards. So I'm not saying it yet because I don't want to overreact week 1. But for these running backs we're talking about right now, if you have any fantasy questions, please lay them in the chat. We'll be more than welcome to answer them. We're just talking about what happened this week in fantasy. Some concerning distribution for some of these guys that we like, kind of on the fence on, versus these rookies that are coming in. One of the biggest, and we can talk about this now, Joe, one of the biggest distributions that I saw that's concerning is the Travis Etienne Tank Bigsby. Now, in the preseason, I said, quit trying to make Tank Bigsby a thing. Is he going to be a thing? Is he ever going to be a thing? But
they're trying to make him a thing.
To that end, as the preseason rolled on, a couple episodes after that, there are certain sectors that we were on him. I did draft him in my Yahoo league as the last round pick, because if he does hit, he hits. But let's talk about this. 12 carries for Tank Bigsby, 12 carries for Travis Etienne. Bigsby, 73 yards to Etienne's 44. Talk to us. Is there a concern trotting out Travis Etienne on a weekly basis? Is this Tank Bigsby just a week 1 Bigsby mirage?
Well, the biggest concern Jacksonville has is that, quite frankly, they weren't able to control the clock when they needed to. They stopped scoring, and they weren't able to control the clock. So that is the biggest concern. And what did you see as Jacksonville's counterpunch response? Was more Tanks Bigsby. So you look at it and go, all right, Miami's an above average defense. They're not a world beating defense, but they're above average. And you basically stopped using Etienne in favor of Bigsby, and it didn't work. It didn't work with Etienne. It didn't work with Bigsby. So to me, the bigger concern in Jacksonville is no one's going to want to start saying this, but Lawrence is a miss. The guy is not producing results. At least with Herbert, you can have a logical reasoning why he keeps getting hurt. With Lawrence, it's just not happening. So we look at this and say, Bigsby or ETN, it might not matter. This is going to be a mid-team that's letting up points and having to get in shootouts, and go from there.
So
Celtics.
I want to ask you this.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. We'll answer Aman's question after I ask you this here.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the passing overall in the NFL this past week, it did lead to a lot of a bad perception of wide receivers, but also not many quarterbacks crested that vaunted 300 number, and a couple of them. We look at 14 quarterbacks went over 200 yards passing, and then obviously the rest of them didn't. Do you think this is going to be the flow from now on, that we're going to have about half of the league passing well and half of the league not? When I look at the quarterbacks that didn't hit 200 yards, the most notable for me,
they're almost all running quarterbacks.
Are Burrow, Dak, Kyler, and Trevor. Those are the most notable concerns.
So, all right. So take Dak aside, because Dak was blowing them out and they stopped throwing it. That was a game script takeout. So Dak excluded. The rest, I mean, the flat out fact is we have more overrated quarterbacks in this league than ever that are inaccurate and will not be successful. The one in Washington is not going to be good. Richardson is probably never getting to 300 yards passing his entire career. He will never consistently do it. He'll get a fluke game here and there. There are too many inaccurate quarterbacks in this league, including Fields. I mean, we draft him in fantasy because running yards are worth 2.5 times what a passing yard is worth. That is the answer. But the reality is most of these guys aren't talented enough to be a running back, and they're not accurate enough. The end result is eventually the Derek Carrs are going to take over, and that's what's going to move this league forward. The running quarterbacks aren't. Lamar Jackson couldn't hit the broadside of a barn when he needed to at the end of that game. He had 3 opportunities that every pocket quarterback in the league completes 2 of the 3 of those touchdowns. He went 0 for 3. And I understand that likely stepped out of bounds, but it's because Lamar threw him out of bounds. So the answer is yes, Bob. The running quarterbacks are not going to get there. However, there is always a slow start in the modern NFL because they don't play the preseason. So we will see overall passing increase above that 200 to about the 220 threshold. But we'll have this exact same conversation in October. Just the number will be at
only 10 quarterbacks got over 220 yards this past week. So let's get to Aman's question here. Should I trade Kelsey and Mostert for Kamara and Ingram full PPR? Here's where I fall on that, and then Joe can talk to us a little bit about his thoughts. Mostert's one of our guys. He was one of our guys going into this season. And I texted Joe over the weekend, and I said, Joe, should I be concerned here? We look at what Mostert did, and it wasn't much. And it seemed to us that this game, for what it was worth, is one of those games. What really concerned me was the fact that Jeff Wilson had 5 carries in this game. I didn't quite understand what was happening there. So Mostert with 6 carries, 9 yards, is not anything to be excited about. So should we worry about it? Well, Tua passed the ball 37 times in that game. And what you saw from the perspective of, from the running game, is that they only had 27 or so rushes overall, or something in that market there. Let me look it up really quickly. What we saw is that the rushing game at some point faded. Passing game kind of stepped in. We're looking at a team that had 23 rush attempts last year. 23 rush attempts this past week. That's a low bar for the league. And the Miami Dolphins, that game wasn't really like what we thought that game was going to be. Was not what that game actually was.
No, it wasn't. It
And
was much more subdued.
Ingram definitely failed. Most tight ends in the league this week didn't perform at all. This happened last year, week 1 as well, when a guy like Hunter Henry was able to have a week 1 be the tight end 1 in week 1. So I'm not like too concerned about the tight end facet of it. But back to Mostert here is that, yeah, it's concerning that he only had 9 yards, but also he had 6 carries and 2 receptions to Devin Achan's 10 carries and 7 receptions. So what I see is a split that definitely favors Devin Achan, but not fully eliminates Raheem Mostert. And we knew that walking into the season. We knew that these players offered different things to the Dolphins. But what we saw in this game was where we're relying on Mostert to be used, they didn't end up getting there a lot to use Mostert, right? So an 80-yard pass to Tyreek for a touchdown could always be a potential thing that they could do. But when you look at what happened in this game, and if you stat watch this game at all, like I did, you're going to notice, like, for most of this game, there was a whole lot of nothing from Miami, like a whole lot of nothing.
First half.
So am I worried about Mostert? Yeah. But am I worried a lot about Mostert? No, not really.
King Flores, we'll get to yours in a minute.
Not really. So
let me hit you with this here.
Would I consider this trade? I would consider it. But I definitely wouldn't panic yet. I would consider this trade because of the way that I saw the usage of Kamara. That could definitely be something that stays. But also, you got to think that they're not going to blow everybody out. They're not going to do that. And so I would temper expectations on Kamara and on Mostert at the same time. But Kelce and Ingram, to me, like we just said about the Jaguars, I'm still in on Ingram. I still think he's going to have a really good season. But I'm also still on Kelce, because we know that when Andy Reid plans, he plans to win that game, and some players aren't used, and some players are used a lot. Now that everybody knows that Worthy is a threat, they can't all push their coverages, everything to Kelce anymore and double him and do whatever they need to do. So he's going to have his space to do what he needs to do. So, Joe, what do you think?
So, first of all, that's a very good answer on
Kelce. Your question.
That's a very good answer here on Kelce. Let me hit you first thing. Among, I don't think you should be panicking on Mostert yet. So just in general for the trade that you're presenting here, I absolutely would not do it, because first off, Kamara is coming off what will be his absolute best performance of the year. That game script went as good as it possibly could for Kamara's usage. So I don't want to buy it high at any point. If you want to get rid of Mostert, I don't recommend it, but definitely not buying someone at the peak of their value is never a good idea.
Hey, Nino, what's up?
The answer on Mostert, though, is that you have to remember he's not the one they use to produce the lead. He's the one they use to preserve the lead and win the game.
Yeah.
This wasn't that kind of game script. This was shit. We're losing 17-0 in the middle of the second quarter. We need to get back in this. As Bob said, they threw a little bit higher than they normally do. Miami, they're still a 60-40 spread, but they like to be closer to 60-40. They were about 65-35, if I'm recalling that correctly. And as I look at that, Mostert's going to be the one to
answer that question, Nina.
It won't be Wilson when they're milking it out. So, I mean, Miami's projected to win 10, 11 games. They're going to have plenty of games when they're milking stuff out. But Mostert should not be an automatic pencil in RB2. He might have to be a little bit more situational for you going there.
And walking into the season, Nino, like we said, he was one of our guys and one of our zero RB targets if we were going after him. Like we said, we wouldn't panic yet. We'll get to Nino's question, and Bronson, we'll get to your question in a moment. I just traded Laporta and Devonta Smith for Garrett Wilson, riding likely the rest of the season. Did I F up?
Yes.
King, we're not high on Garrett Wilson. Again, we have not seen a game get played yet, but I think you sold Laporta really, really low.
You did.
What we see from this game, and I think you sold Devonta Smith way low too.
I would have done Devontae for Garrett straight up.
When we look at
I still would have done that trade, but that would have been fair.
When we look at Devonta Smith's usage in that game, he isn't the hammer. So don't expect Devonta Smith to ever be the hammer for Jalen Hurts. But what we saw from Devonta Smith is a 27.6% target share in that game to A.J. Brown's 34.5%. Nobody, I mean, basically, outside of Goddard and Barkley, they don't have another Johnny Wilson.
Yeah, if Barkley's not getting 3 touchdowns every game, Devontae Smith will upscore.
Now,
that's his floor, basically, what he gave you.
When it comes to Laporta, the game, whatever is going on for Detroit in the passing game with the emergence of JMO in this game definitely will illuminate for some defenses the need to cover Jameson Williams, whereas they might not have game planned exclusively for Jameson Williams. They definitely game plan for Amon-Ra. They definitely game plan for Laporta. Laporta with only, I believe, 4 catches in that game. When I look at Laporta and I see, we all know tight ends are capable of throwing up duds. We saw it this week that almost every single tight end that we drafted higher than round 6, we still have Kittle tonight, and we still have Conklin going tonight. But when we look at this again, Jared Goff threw the ball 8 times to wide receivers, or not 8 times to wide receivers, but 14 times to wide receivers yesterday. Mm-hmm. And he threw the ball to Laporta 5 times. Laporta caught almost every single target that was his. I'm not concerned about Laporta, but it's definitely something we talked about last week in terms of, I think it was last week or the week before, in terms of talking about upward swing for Laporta. Laporta, stat-wise, does not have much room within Jared Goff's history to very much improve dramatically on what he was putting out last year. So we drafted him at the peak of his value, and now after week 1, we didn't see a return of that peak value. I'm not settled to give up on him because I think that there are games where this is going to be a Travis Kelce type of thing where you either game plan for him, you game plan for Amon-Ra, and you let JMO go, and you let the running backs go. Not everybody can defend everything. There's going to be some scheming that happens for Detroit. Sam Laporta is definitely going to get his. But what I see here is that when you're looking at the advanced stats on Fantasy Pros, right? You look at air yards. He's not being used down the field because that's where JMO was being used, right?
Well, again, it just won. Laporta is going to have a mass advantage regardless.
He had a 17% target share on the team, and that's good enough.
Yeah, no, but there is still upside for Laporta. I mean, he is still within.
I'm not saying there's not upside. I said that there's not upside within Jared Goff's statistics, especially if Jameson Williams starts to take off. You think Jared Goff could throw for up to 40 touchdowns?
Yeah, I have Jared Goff's statistics not being capped, and you do. The market doesn't have him being capped either.
I think Jared Goff's statistics will be capped. Do I think that you effed up in this deal?
Yes.
The time will tell with Garrett Wilson. We don't know yet. We don't have Garrett Wilson projected very high. I think you gave up too much.
We don't Garrett Wilson high at all. But the one thing I do want to hit on that's before you toss that down there that I do want to comment on is that likely is going to be the real deal. If you own Andrew, sell him now. There was a very evident. There's 2 things to take away from that Baltimore offense in week 1. Isaiah Likely is the second best receiver on that team without a doubt. Mark Andrews is falling off the face of the earth, and they learned that Lamar Jackson cannot throw them the victory. So if you are an owner of Derrick Henry, I know it wasn't a great week, but it's a week to actually celebrate. This is like that year where Kentucky didn't win the national championship, but they had 7 guys drafted in the first round. If you own King Henry, Baltimore knows they have to lean on Henry because Lamar cannot throw him the victory. He's proven that anytime they've ever tried it, his entire career, actually. But nonetheless, Likely is still the second best receiver on that team.
Mm-hmm.
And I would lean on him much more than Andrews. I think that you'll be better
and
off.
it's an interesting thing. I was on TikTok before that game started last week, and one of the content creators on TikTok showed the opening day poster for the Ravens, and you see Lamar Jackson, obviously, you see a couple other players, and on the opening day poster was Isaiah Likely, which was very odd. When it
At worst, he's their third best offensive.
But when it comes down to it, it was very odd to see him over some other selections that could have been there. So that content creator hammered Likely's overs and obviously hit. But what I like to see about Likely is that, like Joe said, Lamar as a passer always has room to grow. We know this. He had 273 yards last week. Definitely buoyed by Likely. Rashad Bateman, 53 yards. Zay Flowers, 37 yards. That's kind of what you're welcome, King. You're very welcome.
Sorry about the answer, but got to tell you the truth.
What we saw from Likely is that giving up Laporta and looking like this is going to stick tight, I don't think you're going to lose much outside of that. So this is more like saying to me, Laporta
you just
and
gave up too much. This
is like saying to me, Laporta and Devonta Smith for Garrett Wilson and Isaiah Likely, because Isaiah Likely becomes the starter for you there.
It's not how you look at it. You spent way too much and got way too little.
I know, but like as a silver lining way to look at it, I mean, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what this split is going to be in Baltimore. Like you said, Joe, I think that Isaiah Likely, and you said this earlier in the offseason, he was one of the guys you were targeting way down low on your list. And sometimes we couldn't buy him too early.
Now you want to do that double stack, King. We'll get to that. But Bronson, to answer your question, which we'll get to in a minute, I need the rest of your roster.
Yeah,
so if you can type in your roster, Bronson, we'll be able to answer that here after Nino.
So when we get a chance here, Nino, I was offered Gibbs and McConkey from Mike Evans and James Conner, but I countered with Mike Evans, Conner, and Palmer for Gibbs and Waddle. Okay.
I like that more than option one where you're giving up Ladd.
Here's where I fall on that. I would keep Ladd based on his usage from this past week's games and based off of just the eye test, is that he is going to be involved in this offense.
You called that from day one?
Being involved in the red zone was really nice to see from Ladd. He had 5 receptions on 7 targets. So obviously a guy that is going to be leaned on.
He's their most talented receiver.
He's going to be leaned on to be a chain mover here. Quentin Johnson with more with the second most yards out of these wide receivers here. It seems like it's going to continue to be a low volume passing attack like people have talked about in the season, but Harbaugh's not going to be afraid to throw the ball when it's necessary. And Ladd looks like he can, from week 1, looks like he can get into spots.
He can.
Not a lot of yak on in that game. So that's definitely, he's not going to be a game breaker down the field yet at this point in his career.
Which is exactly what we called.
He doesn't have to be yet. What I don't like giving up is Mike Evans. I know this was another nice game for Mike Evans. But Palmer, I see why you'd want to target Gibbs and Waddle. I definitely see that with the way that, like we were talking about.
So I would do this trade. I would do the counter trade of Evans, and even getting rid of Evans. I love Evans. But again, this is another situation where you don't going to play Washington every week.
He was getting McConkey, not trading away McConkey. He was getting McConkey, not trading him away.
I was offered Gibbs and McConkey for... Oh, gotcha. So you'd be getting Waddle instead of Ladd? I mean, as much as I love Ladd, Waddle's still better than him. I mean, that's just a fact. No, that's what I'm saying. You're giving away Evans and Palmer. If I were that guy, I personally I like the double stacks. It's one of the ways of, as you see us do DFS later on in the week, it helps you do it. Personally, in my league with Bob here, I'm running a double stack of Philadelphia. I have Hurts, Devontae, and Brown. It's working pretty good. Put up the third most points in the league. So the double stack doesn't hurt you as long as you're in the right offensive system. Granted, I don't think the Chargers are the best
Joe,
to do it in.
And to that point, Joe, and to King, and to your point, Joe, and to King's point here, is that last year, and it's not going to be the same everywhere, but last year in one of my home leagues on Yahoo, in my 12-man home league team, I drafted A.J. Brown 2nd round. 3rd round, I took Devonta Smith. 4th round, I took Josh Allen. You pair those 2 wide receivers with the right offensive capability at quarterback.
You got to stack the quarterback to make it worth it.
These two players in AJ Brown and Smith offer these teams so much different. Like when Smith starts to fade, AJ Brown is going to pick it up. Yeah, it's a little bit of a struggle, but AJ Brown and Devonta Smith's floors on a week-to-week basis aren't really super, super low for me to be worried that I'd be double stacking the wrong team.
Yeah, because it's a high enough passing offense. Philly's certainly across that ball. So is San Francisco for that matter.
I definitely wouldn't be much concerned about that. But to Nino, to your point, I definitely give the trade a try. I wouldn't want to give up Mike Evans, but again, I think that what you're getting back in return is fair enough value to give Mike Evans, because he's obviously, to me, Evans and Gibbs are the stars of that trade. And you know, if I could get Waddle, even with a hurt Waddle at this point in the year, Connor and Palmer wouldn't be much to give up for Waddle.
It's more reliable. Plus Gibbs,
I would definitely.
I would do that second one there.
I like that second one here.
Bronson here is the trade being Terry and Ladd for Kupp. And what the question this really becomes is, what is the depth of the rest of your roster here? So when we look at your other receivers, Chase and Debo are a great start. Bob, off the bat here, I don't see the need here to have volume at receiver. I'm seeing a really deep receiver room, and to upgrade 2 for 1, I think is a great starting point. I think he's in a position he should do it.
Yeah, and Bronson, based off of what we said last week, you know, we were looking at your running backs too, and when it came down to this past week, Tank Bigsby and Bucky Irving look like they could serve as a 1B if those running backs were to go down. So you're kind of good there, right? Zeke obviously is the 1A there in Dallas, which is nice to know. Mm-hmm. And Josh Jacobs, we'll see, right? He had a game, Green Bay's. We'll see what Green Bay's going to do in the future here. But 16 carries for Josh Jacobs, pretty nice. He wasn't doing really, really well to start with, but definitely ended up turning it up towards that late end of the game.
And again, Bronson, sticking within the framework of this team, I definitely would upgrade.
George, we'll definitely get to your questions here.
All right, so George, where are we at here?
But I will say this, Joe. To your point, I would try my best to get Cooper Kupp.
Yes,
you're buying Cooper Kupp at the highest point, like Joe said. You didn't want to buy Kamara at the highest point, but Cooper Kupp.
You're not buying Kupp at his highest point. People are just going to start realizing Kupp should have been higher than Nakua the whole time.
21 targets in that game.
Well, that's also with Puka out, so you can when you're doing your trade negotiations.
But still, if Puka ends up being out and he ends up getting
you win. You
10
win,
targets a game, it's going to be an insane amount for that team. And if you can have your roster be, even though we're down on Burrow after what we saw this past week, we're not. I mean, Chase always has that chance to go for 20 points, 30 points. He had even with Burrow not playing well, Chase still put up above 10 points this past week. So I'm not really worried about Chase. Again, all those top wide receivers we drafted early in that first round, all kind of were average.
Except for AJ Brown.
Outside of Tyreek. Tyreek and AJ Brown went off. Amon-Ra didn't. That's worth talking about. CD Lamb, obviously game script that, you didn't have to really get it to him that much the way that game rolled down. Justin Jefferson got a touchdown. Sam Darnold looked okay. against the Giants, who don't look good at all. And then
Yeah.
Waddle or Tyreek Hill got that long touchdown, and that saved kind of that game for him. So I would definitely try to get Kupp. Bronson, throw the next trade in whenever you have it. I'm back. Should I be worried with DJ Moore?
Yes. Should be worried about everything in Chicago.
George, what we talked about last week is that there, and you mentioned this yourself here, is that there are going to be a great amount of growing pains with Caleb Williams. I own Caleb Williams on my team that also has Jordan Love, and I've got to find a different quarterback option.
You're in trouble.
I got to find a different quarterback option because I'm definitely not sold on what we saw from Caleb Williams. Again, first game, growing pains. I will take that. But what I don't like to see and what I don't want to see is him throwing for under 100 yards. He threw the ball 29 times, 14 completions for only 93 yards. That ain't good. And what we said last week about DJ Moore was that DJ Moore is variably always going to get his, right? Five of the 14 completions went to DJ Moore. 4 of them went to Keenan Allen. That's exactly what we thought was going to happen to start with. But the problem isn't the amount of targets that they're getting. It's where those targets were at, what they had to do with them. There's no yak. Caleb didn't get them in a position that there was enough yak. That's a problem for me. And so that's a problem to me. So I'm definitely concerned about Caleb Williams. And because I'm concerned about Caleb Williams, I would definitely try to trade out of DJ Moore. This trade that you're considering here, trading DJ Moore for Marvin Harrison, I get where you're going with this, right? Is that Harrison had a down week. It was windy. That game was really windy. So a lot of what they're trying to do there didn't really work with Arizona. It didn't necessarily hurt Josh Allen because Josh Allen has like the power in his arm to overcome like a 60-mile-an-hour storm, it feels like. But what we see here in terms of catches, right, is that Dortch got 8 targets. Thanks for the follow, King. What Dortch got 8 targets in that game. We also said that Dortch was a great target for a flex play this past week. And what we noticed was that Dortch got 6 out of those 8 targets. That's definitely not something that's going to be true all season. What we need to look at, though, is that, Joe, and you can talk about this too, is that Marvin Harrison got 3 targets, 1 reception, didn't look good at all. First game as a rookie, other rookies did look good. But the first play out of the half was a throw to Marvin Harrison. So what that tells me is that the coaching staff said, get the ball to Marvin Harrison. Get the ball to Marvin Harrison. What I'm looking at from the stats in this Chicago game is that the ball is going to go to DJ Moore. The ball is going to go to DJ Moore. So what I see from these 2 players is a similar experience. We think Kyler is still a good quarterback. The situation, it didn't look great this past week. But we're yet to see that from Caleb Williams. So am I ready to give up totally on DJ Moore? No.
Yes.
But this is my perspective here. Am I willing to give up totally on DJ Moore? No, because the targets are going to be there, but I don't think that there's going to be a lot to do with them unless Caleb can get the ball downfield. Whereas Kyler, I know Kyler can push the ball downfield. And so if I'm going to have either one of these guys, I would rather have Marvin Harrison because I know that there is going to be an upward swing in the learning curve here for Marvin Harrison, is that Kyler Murray knows what he's doing to a degree, right? He's short, but he knows what he's doing. But Marvin Harrison's learning curve here isn't as high as Caleb Williams' learning curve. And I think that if you were to try to do a trade like that, George, I think that it's definitely really worth trying to get DJ Moore off your team for Marvin Harrison, but knowing that there are going to be growing pains either way for either of those two players.
Here, before you hit that button, Bob. So first off, do not be afraid of stacking your players. Marvin and Murray is a stack. You want that. That's a good thing. But furthermore, and this is true to all of the rookie quarterbacks, the quarterback that had the best week of week one was Penix.
Thanks,
because he's
King.
the only
Much
one who
appreciated.
didn't have his ceiling dramatically diminished. The rest of them all should have just been, if they weren't already bottom of the barrel, you shouldn't want them, and it wasn't already apparent, it should be now. I'm also going to include Richardson in that category as well. The bottom line is that you want to get rid of, and there was a question before, I believe it was from Bronson. You want to get rid of the receivers that are dependent upon this. That even includes McLaurin, the guy who I love. In a vacuum, I have McLaurin ahead of Moore. So we look at this and say, hey, can I get a guy who's going to be on the upswing, as Bob said? Absolutely, you should. And that's the way to go about it. So, that's how we look at this overall. And diving back into it, as it looks like we're kind of wrapping up on your guys' current round of questions. Shoot more at us.
Let's get to George's question here. Should I drop Adonai Mitchell for McMillan or Shaheed? I think so.
I think McMillan.
I would take either of them. At the top of the show, we were talking about what happens when Derek Carr is able to move the ball downfield. When we
we also wanted to point out that that's probably peak Derek Carr. What we just
that
saw.
is peak Derek Carr.
McMillan's just going to continue to increase because I believe we also saw the last high water mark of Godwin.
Well, here's the thing, Joe.
McMillan's going to be replacing it.
I'm not sold on the last time watermark of Godwin, but I will say this. In this game, and this is an interesting stat here, is that Jalen McMillan had 3 targets, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the totality,
all on the same play, by the way, he ran the same route on all of them. He dropped the first one and then boom, touchdown on the last one.
When we look at the totality of these of where these targets are going, right? Mike Evans, 20% of the target share. Chris Godwin, 26% of the target share. And Jalen McMillan, 10% of the target share. What is interesting about Godwin, and this is something, again, going back to we knew who they thought they were type of ideas and thinking here. Godwin went 8 for 8 for 83 yards. What is important about that is that we knew walking into this season that Godwin was going to be moved to the slot. Mm-hmm. And Godwin thrives in the slot. So if there is a team on this schedule that happens to do, whatever their defense happens to be in that week, Godwin is going to be one of those nice flex plays because he's shown that in the slot, I can be fairly successful in doing my job there. What I like about McMillan, though, granted only 1 catch on 3 targets, is that it seems like you said, Joe, logistically, he's going to improve as this season goes on, right? That he's going to be out on the field in certain scenarios. The yak was good. You look at it and you say, all right, for a beginning performance, I'm not too upset about this. Again, going back to Chris Godwin, when you look at when you look at the stats of where these throws are at, right? Mike Evans, 10 plus yards, 3 catches, 10 plus yards. When you look at Chris Godwin, 4 catches, 10 plus yards, and only 1 over 20 yards. So, Jalen McMillan could be that guy for Baker Mayfield. They can push that ball downfield when they need to, and it's not just a chain mover. So that's what excites me about McMillan. And for the same reason that excites me about McMillan, it also excites me about Shaheed. However, I'm not entirely sure how much time Carr is going to have in future games because they can't play Carolina every game, and they can't play, like for Tampa, they can't play Washington every game. So that is definitely something to look at when we look at what happened this past week. So when we when we think about what's going to happen with us this week, Joe, tomorrow we're going to do our regular episode from 3:45 to 6. So join us from 3:45 to 6 for more thoughts on the week ahead. Instead of looking back at last week, we're going to look at the week ahead. We're
New
going to
rankings for the week coming out.
We're going to be getting our rankings out tomorrow as well. We're going to be talking about DFS on Wednesday and Thursday. So if you joined us today, make sure to join us tomorrow from 3:45 to 6, from Wednesday from 3:45 to around 4:45, and Thursday the same time frame to talk about this upcoming week. Again, we'll give you our favorite players of the week to go for. If you're in DFS, we'll be building lineups together. If you want some lineup advice, we're more than welcome to be giving lineup advice all week. So if you have any questions that start brewing, any trades that you happen to make, definitely post them in the chat and we'll get to you. And King, we thank you very, very, very much for your donation. We really appreciate.
Sure do, man.
We really appreciate our contributors. We really appreciate all of the people that are watching today and every day that tune in. And we hope that we can lead to some winning weeks. If you have any players going tonight, Monday night, we wish you the best of luck. We hope that Kittle has a big game for George.
Well, let's give you guys all a little bit of extra money, man. I mean, the bottom line with tonight's game is that San Francisco's going to win it. They're going to cover, and it's going to get ugly. I mean, this is going to be a kind of game where you might want to sell back to 5.5. This is going to be a rude awakening for the former and never again champion.
And we'll see how this distribution goes with Ayuk. You know, people saying that it's going to be a limited-ish playing time. We'll see how Debo does, because Debo's in a weird place where his splits between zone and man are much different than a lot of other teams or a lot of other players out there. So this is definitely a test for the 49ers. And this is a big test for the Jets as well, in that the Jets, we need to see, and this is the telling thing for Garrett Wilson, right? We need to see how Aaron Rodgers is going to do. Yeah, many of us believe that Tyler Conklin could end up usurping some of that target share from Garrett Wilson, especially in the red zone.
Well, Wilson's target share is going down no matter what. It's going to Williams, it's going to Conklin. It's going down. The guy
we're most interested in seeing tonight, the guy I think that many people are interested in seeing tonight and how he performs, is Breece Hall. This could be, a matchup for Breece on paper that could be pretty good. But I'm definitely, because we didn't see Breece Hall with Aaron Rodgers, I'm really, knowing that we have a large share of Breece in our best ball leagues, I'm really, really curious to see how he coexists with Aaron Rodgers, because it's very difficult for many, many players to coexist with Aaron Rodgers. So I'm definitely interested to see if this year, if we're going to get more rushing Breece or more pass catching Breece. That's what I'm definitely
the second one.
Didn't
but that being said, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of Rodgers. So that being said, you're not going to see good Rodgers ever again.
But we'll check in with this game tomorrow for sure. That will be one of our talking points tomorrow. While we're on air, we'll definitely be talking about the game that was tonight before we get into the week ahead.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all, and we'll be with you again tomorrow, guys.